Alright, we're going outside so the little guy can watch the chickens while I do this. Chickens are endless entertainment for children. I strongly suggest them. But I wanted to, like, keeping on the same thread of pregnancy stuff. Just gonna do all these videos in one day because I'm on this track right now. But something that I've been thinking about a lot is how our society does, I would say, a pretty good job of separating sex from reproduction. And I mean, there's a lot of upsides to doing that. Like, nowadays we pretty much can do that. You know, you've got a lot of birth control options anymore. I don't know if I would consider abortion. That's not really separating the two, but it's like a further effort to do it. It's like, don't worry, if all else fails, you can still, like, do kind of a forced separation after the fact. But I think as a society, the long-term repercussions are going to be pretty negative. Because the truth of the matter is you can't really fully separate those two things. And I think the biggest part of the reason that you can't is because we have, like, maybe if we had, like, many generations to, like, integrate that idea into ourselves. But to go from women having almost no control over their reproduction, like, less than 100 years ago, to women have almost complete control over their reproduction if they actually put some effort into it nowadays. You know, that was a pretty rapid change, and I don't think that we take into account just the biological realities of both genders when it comes to sexual activity. And I know that sex ed class certainly doesn't cover this. But for women, at least, you know, we are programmed so that we're aware that any sexual partner that we have has the potential of being the father of our children. And that's ingrained in us, and we can't do anything about that. So we have kind of like a built-in bonding thing. We want that man to, well, consciously we don't, but biologically your desire to have the man who's potentially going to be the father of your children stick around it was a biological necessity. You needed somebody to stick around and help you, you know, through the pregnancy and afterwards to look after the child for, you know, 18 years or whatever. So to have, and I remember experiencing this and not knowing what it was when I was younger. And I think that if I understood my own biology a lot better, I would have understood what it was that I was feeling, because it definitely wasn't conscious. And I really believed that you could separate sex from reproduction, and basically you would throw away all of the guilt and all of the worry, and you could do family planning, and life was going to be made like easy peasy cake, and you know, it was all within your own control. And I don't know what it's like for men, you know. I don't know what that side of it is like, but I imagine that there's probably also some issues with trying to pretend that any woman you sleep with just isn't gonna be your baby mama, you know. But I think that there is definitely an issue with, if you pretend that those things are 100% separate, which I think we're doing pretty effectively, surprisingly, in our first world countries, modern Western societies today. When those things do accidentally collide, I feel like for young women it's extremely catastrophic. And I'm sure for young men it is as well. You know, either you're dealing with something that you never anticipated having to come up against, or you always thought happened to other people, or you're having an abortion, and I know I was lucky enough to not have to deal with that, not to have to do. The language around this is difficult. I never made that choice. Like I was never in a situation where I feel like that was a choice that I needed to make. But I know that I could have been, and I know that if I had, and then I know that it would have been extremely emotionally difficult for me. And I think, I think that it would have had extremely long-term repercussions on my life if that was a choice that I had had to make. And I'm sure that if I had, I would have been pro-choice for the rest of my life, just because I didn't want that guilt to be, I wouldn't have wanted to admit what I had done, and I would have just buried it, and I would have had probably some issues with some self-loathing. But it's definitely something that we need to talk about more in our society, because I think that ultimately, what all of the stuff that I wanted to talk about today boils down to is that we're not talking about human biology anymore. And we weren't talking about it, 15 years ago when I first had sex ed classes. And we're certainly talking about it even less now. And if it's interesting how the left seems to be a strong proponent of using science to understand how we should react to the world around us. But for some reason, when it comes to human biology, there's, I don't want to be an us versus them sort of thing, but there's a willingness to state that we're animals, and that's why we should basically be allowed to behave like animals when it comes to our sexuality. But we're not willing to discuss like the actual biological realities and repercussions of being an animal. So it's a very weird thing. It's like you admit it so that you can say, do what thou wilt sort of stuff, but then you're unwilling to accept that that means that we are subject to the rules of biology. And I think that that's something that needs to be married again. Sorry. Just not to try and force people to behave a certain way, but just so that we know that when people make decisions, they're making conscious, educated decisions as opposed to just believing the current narrative that's being sold to them.